My guest today is Mexican-American filmmaker Merced Elizondo, and he is based in Texas, and his work focuses on intimate, character-driven narratives. He is a Ryan Murphy Half Initiative Directing Fellow and the recipient of the NewNarratives Filmmaker Grant through NewFilmmakers LA and Warner Brothers Discovery. His previous film, Manos de Oro, screened at Oscar qualifying festivals including HollyShorts, LALIFF International, and won Best Short Film at tomorrow's Filmmakers Today. But his newest short, the award-winning short film The Mourning of, has officially qualified for the 2026 Academy Awards, and The Mourning of is a story about a young woman who has been mourning the tragic loss of her mother in the most peculiar way imaginable by secretly attending the funerals of strangers. Now, after weeks of lying and searching for solace through the grief of others, her inability to move on finally catches up with her. So let's welcome award-winning filmmaker Merced Elizondo and his Oscar-qualifying short, The Mourning of, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ward. I'm so delighted to be talking to you today. Thank you.
Well, I loved your film, and I also loved your take on grief with The Mourning of. Where did the idea come from, and is this a personal story?
It's personal in the sense that I myself have dealt with grief in my life, for the last couple of years, through all of my life, to be honest with you. But this was actually the first idea or nucleus of an idea that I had for a film back in 2016. I was driving my grandma from Mexico to Texas, and she was telling me a story on our very long drive about these women in Mexico called mujeres plañideras, which I don't know has a direct translation to English, but it was basically these women that would go to these funerals of strangers dressed in all black and effectively be town criers, where they would just lament over complete strangers that they didn't know anything about, but they would want to give them a funeral that was fit for a king or a queen. And I thought that's bloody fascinating. Like I had never heard of that before. So I got back home to Texas and I started researching what this was all about. And I quickly stumbled on a website called rentermourner.uk. And that is exactly what you think it is, where for $62 an hour, you could rent what is effectively an actor to sit down with the family of someone that was deceased. And they would basically say, like, oh, Merced, his favorite color was red. He was from Texas. He played soccer and he was a kid. He played baseball in high school. They'd give you this profile of who the deceased was so that you can go break bread with the family at the church, at the funeral. So they'd shake your hand and go, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I knew Merced in fourth grade. Like, we're really going to miss him. And for an extra elevated fee, they would even go up and give eulogy. So that's all to say, like, I thought that was just the most absurd thing that I'd ever heard. But I thought what I think is even more interesting, or is someone who wasn't doing this for money. It was someone who was doing this because they felt like they had to. They had to like put themselves in this perpetual state of mourning and grief as a way to honor and remember the memory of their loved one. Because for Maribel, in the morning of, to move on from her mother is to move on in a way that she's not fully ready to do yet. It's almost like a band-aid that she just does not want to rip off. And I knew I had to sit tight on this idea. It was too precious to me to screw up as a baby filmmaker, someone who had never made films before. And yeah, a couple years later, man, I mean, it was the project of my dreams, and I finally got to make it.
Wow, I've seen a lot of films dealing with grief, and Maribel was the first where I have seen in which it was an unhealthy form of grief. Of course, no one is taught how to grieve properly and really left to figure it out for themselves. And that's basically what you did with that story.
I think that there's no proper way to grieve. I think there are things that are more healthy or toxic than others. This is destructive what Maribel is doing. She is selfishly almost, I like to call it like a grief empathy vampire, where she's sort of sucking up the grief out of other people's funerals to, for her own benefit. But at the end of the day, whether the people know who she's really there for, what she's really there for or not, she's still in a way contributing to the honoring of someone who passed away, whether she knew them or not. So it gets into this really weird moral gray space where, like, yeah, she's doing it for her own benefit, but at the same time, she's still honoring someone who passed away. Yeah, she's drinking their wine and eating their food and breaking bread with complete strangers, but it's not illegal, but it's a little more questionably ethically bizarre. you know?
Yeah, almost a funeral crasher.
It's that, you know what? That's exactly what she is. That's a great way to put it.
you know, and there are people who find comfort in grief, and then some find comfort in the midst of others' grief. Both are unhealthy, and I think Maribel kind of was doing both. And, it goes back to the saying, grief is just love looking for a place to go, but many don't know how to give it a place to go. But I think with Maribel in this story, we know she didn't know how to move on, but I think some people feel that if they move on, they're going to forget.
That's the entire thesis of my movie is in what you just said, where I don't know if you ever lost someone, but there's this guilt. You wake up one day, you go about your day, you put your shoes on, you go to work, you come back home, you make dinner, you go to the gym, you watch TV a little bit, and then you lay your head down to bed, and then you realize, oh man, I didn't think about my loved one once today. And then you sort of like retroactively like go back and you sort of put yourself in this weird state because you feel like you have to, like you feel guilty for not remembering them. You start to ask yourself, like, do I still remember what their face in my head? Do I still remember what their voice sounds like? So you sort of go back emotionally and put yourself in this weird space because you feel like you have to. And that's Maribel. I mean, she's living through that, and at least in the time frame of the story, the 5 months after she lost her mom, like she's just stuck and doesn't want to. She wants to stay stuck.
Well, yeah. Well, and then the thing is there should be no guilt because there's always a process of moving on, but moving on doesn't mean forgetting. Sure, if you go a day or a week or a month and you never give the person any thought, and of course, that can take a couple of years before that ever happens, but so many people are in fear of forgetting them, but there should be no guilt behind it because life moves on and we have to move on with it. But there's that scene in the film uh when it's actually one of the first scenes because the priest had already figured it out, but he didn't say anything. And then there's that time when he was just like, enough is enough. But then he said something so, I think it's the most powerful line in the film. And he says, you can't unbreak your heart. And, but at the same time, we do need people to help in mending it back together. And, but Maribel, that was an unhealthy situation because I don't know. She was finding comfort in the pain.
That line. There's two lines in that. In that moment with the priest at the end, played by Julio Cedillo, Father Tomas. One is you can't unbreak a heart. Like the damage has been done. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? Like it's out. Like this is something that is going to be out for the rest of your life. So you may as well get used to it. You may as well live with it. That's number one. Number two is the line that he tells her towards the end of that monologue where he says, grief is gray. It's not black and white. It's not one day you wake up and go, okay, I moved on. I'm done now. It's this in this like weird gray space. And it's not like ripping off a band-aid and then calling it done, calling it fixed. So I think the thesis of the movie really is in that monologue. And effectively what the purpose of it and what it serves is he's giving her permission to move on, to say like it's okay, like you can move on, you should move on, like let it in, welcome it in. So by the time we get to the end, without obviously giving away any spoilers, like Maribel finally comes to terms with the idea that like it needs to the floodgates need to finally break in order for me to begin my healing process because it's all just like built up like a dam. Just you just compound it and compound it and compound it, and then all of it just kind of eventually releases.
Yeah, when he said about the gray, you know, that caught my ears very, very quickly. And and I got to thinking about, Maribel in this situation because she was the perfect example of someone who really needed a support system to help her with her grief. But then I also assumed that maybe her mother was her best friend and that she didn't have anyone to turn to express the grief she was going through because a lot of people that go through grief sometimes they don't want to they feel like I don't want to bother somebody with my pain. Like nobody like I'm
It's when you
like
it's
it's
when
an
you need yeah, that's
inconvenience.
right. It's when you need the most help. And that was what was so fascinating to me about this character is that, she's attending these funerals and feels like lonely. She wants to be around people who might be in a similar emotional state as her. They, in their case, like all the people that she's attending the funerals of, like they just lost their loved one. They're in this emotional state that's like very recent. For her, it's been 5 months. but she wants to like remember that first time that remember the day of her mom's funeral over and over. It was like Groundhog Day for her emotions, nonstop, right? And Maribel is surrounded by people constantly because she keeps attending these funerals, and yet she's the loneliest person in there. You know, like she's still at the end of the day, she still has to deal with what's inside of her and her problems. No amount of people and talking about grief and crying with others for others, but in front of others is going to get you to just deal with what's in the heart, and that's Maribel's plight. Throughout the film and throughout this journey that she's been on. But yeah, she's around people all the time, but we made a very intentional choice to frame her and to shoot her in a way, like, filmically, that still isolated her, emotionally and physically.
Well, yeah, because when she would attend the other funerals, emotionally, she would have no connection there whatsoever. So, like you said in the beginning, there is this selfishness that is within her by just being there because she's only there for her own benefit. She's not there for the benefit of anybody else.
Of
So,
anybody else.
yeah,
That's
so
right.
it's like if she's sitting in the church during the funeral with all of these people she does not know, it's a total disconnect with what she's going through. So there's
That's
no
right. It's
healing.
all
There's
like
no
it's almost it's not it's just yeah, she's frozen herself in amber emotionally, and you can see it. She's just stuck and just sort of looking for anything she can cling on to try to like keep the memory of her mother alive. Because I mentioned this, like, to move on for her is to move on from her mother in a way that she just doesn't want to do and isn't ready to do until Tomas finally lays the hammer down and goes like, you should and you have to, because this is gonna stop.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, with the priest, he was trying, of course, he gave her space because he was still trying to figure out how do I approach this in the right way. But there are times when you just have to be a bit firm, not mean, but to get the point across. She got she got the message because I one of the scenes that I really loved in this film was she had never given herself to the grief and she never had a really good cry because tears actually become the cleansing or the outlet, which is a very powerful outlet to allow someone to move on. And again, like we said, grief isn't about forgetting the person you lost, it's about channeling their memory the right way.
You'll notice that Maribel doesn't cry in the film until the end. I mean, even in the flashback scene where we're reimagining the funeral of her mother in a vision, but she's not crying. She's not simply. She's just teared up. She has glassy eyes, but she's never fully lending herself to and allowing herself to actually lean into crying, because to cry for her is an acknowledgement that her mom is gone. It's the beginning of acknowledging that I have to start moving on, and she doesn't want to. Like, it's a deliberate and intentional decision by Maribel to stay stuck, because she feels that in order to remember her mom, she has to be stuck. So yeah, that's something you called that out very nicely. And that was something that was even in the page as well. Like, I didn't want to see her cry. Like, she doesn't earn those tears until the very end.
Well, the priest gave, in a way, in a subtle way, the priest gave her permission.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, he does. He gives her permission and he gives her agency to finally do the thing that she should have been doing all along, but took her a high road to get there.
Yeah, and I just thought it was such wonderful writing in this film. So, how much research? I know you had done some research on the people that were hired to go to funerals, but how much research did you do about grief that would help you to write your script?
Well, a lot of research. This was one of the darkest times I've ever had writing a film, because I mean, I've been to funerals, and I've mourned people. I've gone to churches, and I've kind of done the whole song and dance here in Texas to people that I've lost. But to really get in that emotional state, I would watch just funeral masses on YouTube that were recorded, and it was an interesting time when I was writing, because it was during COVID or a little after COVID, where people that couldn't go to a funeral, they were broadcasting them. So there were many funeral broadcasts on YouTube. People were masked up and basically doing that as a way to grieve remotely because you couldn't get on a plane because of the pandemic. So I would just watch those on repeat. I'd have a lot of Mozart and a lot of just organ music playing in the background to really get into that emotional state. But I think that the research for me, I mean, I was just tapping into a lot of what I felt. It's really just tapping into the emotional side of things about what it means to grieve and to move on and to try to move on, and what's the healthy and unhealthy association with that, and what comes along with it.
Well, you have a very large cast for a short film. What was the
Yeah,
casting process like, and where did you find Natalia Villegas?
Villegas.
V- uh,
Yeah, Villegas.
in
Yeah.
mind, yeah. So, did you have her in mind when you wrote the script, or was it just through a casting process?
No, so I'll tell you. So I wrote the priest part of Father Tomas for Julio Cesar Cedillo, who's a dear friend of mine and an actor based in Fort Worth here. He was in Narcos Mexico and Sicario, a bunch of wonderful projects. And he and I actually collaborated on my previous short film. He was the lead in that film called Manos de Oro. So it was our first collaboration. And I wrote the part with him in mind just because I knew that like this part, any priest really in any movie, and I'm sure you feel the same way, but every priest sort of plays this like very stock priest version of just like a robot where they're like men of clergy, just men, the men of the cape, and there's no personality behind them. And I think like this character could have easily come off as this uh, grumpy priest to Maribel, but he needed to have a depth that I knew Julio could bring. So I wrote the part for him in mind, and we talked about it. And I was so lucky and fortunate that he agreed to do this. But our finding our Maribel, that was a challenge because I auditioned many, many people. I think cinema and actresses it's all in the eyes, right? And it wasn't until I saw Natalia and auditioned her a couple times to where I realized like she's got the look where you cover up here and down here, and if you just see this, you can't tell if she's about to cry or about to jump for joy. Like she has these beautiful, glassy, doughy eyes that I think are made for the big screen and made for representing emotion. So we found her, I want to say maybe 3 weeks before production. And it was a miracle that she was available because she was vacationing on a cruise at the time. It was a miracle that we got her audition in on time. I mean, everything just lined up perfectly to where finally, when we auditioned and did read throughs on Zoom, she became Maribel in front of me, and I'll cherish that collaboration with her for the rest of my life. But yeah, you're right. Outside of that, I mean, the team was enormous. I had to direct over 175 extras across 5 days of production in Dallas to do this, and I mean in my previous film, the one that I did with Julio, Manos de Oro, I mean, it was just like a three-hander, just mainly just two, three actors, and that was it. So to jump to that was very, very daunting and a challenge that I don't know that I'll ever meet again, because it was just it was a pain in the butt. But we pulled it off. We pulled it off, and I have to give credit to my wonderful background talent because I never struggled in the edit with them. They were all consistently crying when they needed to, and grabbing those rosaries and the tissues. But a lot of them, actually, interestingly enough, they came from Oklahoma. They had just done background talent work for Killers of the Flower Moon with Scorsese, and they came in and saw the posting and they did it. And I can see why they worked on Killers because they did a great job.
Wow. Now, one of the elements that I loved about the priest, excuse me, was when he when he sat in the pew behind Maribel and he leaned over. He didn't come across as holier than thou. He came across as a regular person. I think he may have had one cuss word slip out. So he became instant relatable for Maribel to listen to. And was that done on purpose?
It was, and I have to tell you, I did it on purpose, but I didn't think that people would react to it in that way. It's almost like comical because like we just did an Academy screening of the movie on Monday here in Los Angeles, and every single time that you hear Father Tomas say Jesus Christ, or the diocese is on my ass, like when he says these
Mhm.
things, like people just burst into laughter, and I think it's because it disarms you from the illusion that this priest is just this like stoic, very man of the cloth, like holier than thou, like you said. I think you put it brilliantly. He's one to one with you. He's relatable, and it also just shows that he cares. Like I'm gonna strip the mantle. I'm gonna take it off. I'm gonna take the mask off and just speak to you like a human. I'm not gonna speak to you like a priest. I'm gonna speak to you like a friend and someone that cares about you and someone that I think needs advice. So I think again, I have to give all the credit in the world to Julio. I think he really, really humanized Father Tomas in a way that I don't know that anyone else could have.
Oh, he absolutely did. Now, this has never happened to me when I've watched a short film screener. So tell me about the cinematography because I was literally 2 seconds into the film and I was like, I'm going to love this.
That's all the credit in the world to dear friend and brilliant cinematographer Mateus Bastos out of New York. Yeah, he and I struck up a friendship online through Facebook and Instagram a couple years ago, and I had always knew he'd be the one to shoot this because I just think so highly of him and as a person and as a DP. And this collaboration for me was a match made in heaven. I mean, it's one of my favorite collaborations that I hope I could take with me for the rest of my career because I think Maddie's brilliant. But yeah, we were looking for texture in the image. We wanted something that looked filmic, that looked rich, contrasty, and that was the goal. We knew we'd be in these dimly lit spots with not so much light, but a lot of light coming in through stained glass windows. At night, that we knew the church would be really yellow, so that for us was the jumping off point. Looking at cinematography from No Country for Old Men, from Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, like this very just rich, rich, rich imagery that informed a lot of what we wanted to do. But yeah, I mean, the goal was to move the camera and keep an eye very, very steady on Maribel. And the question that we always asked ourselves is, who's looking at who? Tomas looking at Maribel and everyone looking else at Maribel, but Maribel almost seeing herself as well, like being very aware of her surroundings and being aware that she shouldn't be here. So Maddie is not just like a guy that's going to tell you, going to ask you, where do I put the camera? Where do you want it? Everything has an intention to it, to inform the story and to inform the character. And I couldn't have pulled off what we did without Maddie and the imagery that he was able to pull off.
Yeah, I loved it. I even loved it down to the font style into the film.
I've never heard anyone compliment my fonts, and I think that's the biggest honor I'll take.
Well, because the moment the film started, I went, "Oh, this is going to be good." I mean, and that rarely ever happens to me. But now you have an incredible music score. So, how did you collaborate with Renee Boschio to get the right feel for the music for each of the scenes? Because you got a lot of funerals here.
Yeah, I had been scouting Renee for a while because he's done the music for a couple of friends of mine for their shorts. So he was the obvious choice to do this for me, to be honest with you, just because I think very, very highly of his work. But it was an interesting task to have to pull this off because we're in churches for the majority of the film. So I knew from the beginning we wanted a very organ-driven score, just because of the nature of Catholic funerals, if you will. I think there's a pageantry and a ceremony to funerals that I really wanted to lean into in terms of the music. Like they almost sound very transcendent, and that's what we wanted. I was very lucky that we found an organ player somewhere in Middle America. I forget exactly where in which state, but to record the score, we added a bunch of different mics to the organ and recorded it live. So Renee wrote the music, we did it digitally, and then we felt good enough about it, and then we recorded it live. So everything you're hearing with it, that it's organ based, it's recorded on a live organ in a church. All the echo, all the reverb. But that was a task, to not just make it seem pretty music for the sake of pretty music. It had to have some emotion to it, and it had to have some depth that went just far beyond it sounding and looking and sounding pretty. But I think Renee pulled off a miracle. I watched it at a screening on Monday, and a friend of mine turned to me and goes, "Man, Renee just killed it with the music." And it's one of the proudest things I am that I can take away from the film is just the score and how brilliant it is.
Well, one of the things that I was listening to was with the music score, and because Maribel is attending different funerals, you were able to separate the type of music per setting so it wasn't the same throughout the film.
That's right. Yeah, no, that was key. Like she's in a couple funerals like throughout the film, like some in her head, and then some actually like live. But there's organ all throughout. I don't think there's a single scene of music or moment of music where there's no organ. So that was key for us to really try to lean into that. But again, props to Renee because he delivered something that I think is probably the favorite score of any movie that I've done up to this point.
So, what's been the audience's reactions when they've seen this film?
I have to tell you, I never in a million years that I think this movie would, number one, get to this point, to be able to sit here and talk to you about, in the middle of an Oscar campaign. So that's number one. But number two, to have the fortune to sit with people and have them talk to me about their experience with grief. I did a screening of the movie back in in September at the Dallas Museum of Art, because I'm based in Dallas. And a friend of mine lifted his hand, someone that I knew at the time, or still know, lifted his hand during the Q&A and said, "Hey man, I want to tell you thank you, because I just lost my dad on Tuesday, and this movie was screened on a Saturday. It had been less than a week since he lost his father, and he came out to watch the movie. And he said, as soon as I saw Maribel in that church, I knew exactly what she was doing. I recognized the journey with grief and what I'm about to go through. So I want to thank you, because you've really prepared me emotionally for what's to come." And I put away the awards, put away the festivals, and anything that we've done or will do up until this point. Like that's when you do it. You do it to change lives and to move hearts. And if you change one, you change them all, right? So that is just an example of the kind of conversations that I've had with people. On Monday, I had a woman coming up to me crying after the screening, just saying, "Look, I lost my mom and I've lost my daughter." And I recognize that feeling of wanting to feel stuck and not wanting to move on. So I think you captured it in such a beautiful way. And that's why we do it. That's why I do it. I want to make cinema that like compels you to ask questions, but also moves your heart, makes you cry, makes you laugh. And if I can do that, I feel like I've done my job. So I just think that to have that luxury to have people connect with the movie, it's a miracle. It's a magic trick that I'm still like in awe of that we get to do. We play dress up for a living, and people respond to that magic.
Yeah, they absolutely do. Now, both of us, you and I, we live in Texas, and many in the film industry don't realize that the Hispanic and Latino community are the most underrepresented community in film. And I'm going to add to something to that, because the general public will say, well, you have Univision, you have Telemundo, but they're basically a speck on the total landscape. Why is the Hispanic and Latino community in film underrepresented so much?
I think it's a number of things. I've always told people that it feels like Hollywood puts us in a box, and only certain kinds of stories are able to come out of that box. It's almost like they see our stories as so foreign and different. And all they say to us is, go, "You're an immigrant. Tell us how bad it is." And that's the spectrum of all they want to see from us. And I like to hold up a giant middle finger to that, because I just think we're so much more capable of just, I truly, like, I just think we're so much more capable than just that. I think we can be villains. We can be in romances. We can be in action thrillers. Like, there's just so much that we're capable of for it. So I think that at a time where our voices are being us now more than ever, I aspire to normalize the integration of Latinos and the Hispanic community in narratives that go far beyond the limited perception that this business has about us. I want to see Latinos in original, cinematic, personal stories. And we had just, I mean, for a long time, we haven't been afforded that opportunity and afforded that luxury. So that's what I feel is like my crucible as a Latino filmmaker, and my responsibility, quite frankly, is to make these stories that, yes, there's Latinos that in my films that speak a little English, they speak a little Spanish, but besides that, anyone has an entry point into them. It's a story base level. It's about grief, it's about moving on, and about mourning. Outside of that, there's an in for everybody. I think like a friend of mine said this beautifully at a film festival last month. He said it should be culture first. Sorry, character first, culture second.
No, I come.
Always, always.
Oh,
And I think, yeah, they want us to put the cart before the horse, and I just think that's a fast highway to nowhere.
yeah, and I completely agree with that, because when I watched the film, I didn't label it with any ethnic group whatsoever. I looked at it like, okay, here's this young woman, she's dealing with grief in an unhealthy way. And and I see so many films, and especially when it comes to the Oscars, especially the Oscars. So because I see a ton of Arabic films. There's films that are from Bollywood. There's the European. There could be German, French, British. You do see white, but white ends up being, not, to tell you the truth, most of the short films I see, rarely do I ever see that many coming out of LA or New York, but out of all of the cultures that I see represented within film, and even and Asians have a very good chunk of that, um, but it's the Latino and the Hispanic community that is the smallest. And now it's Oscar awards season, and I think maybe yours is the second film that I've seen the whole year that could
Is that
be
crazy?
labeled Hispanic Latino, and I still get shocked every year that this community is not larger.
It's so fascinating work because we look at some of the Latin American directors like Pablo Larraín, Chileans, the Argentinians, even the Mexicans to a degree. They make Mexican, truly Mexican Argentinian cinema. They make it in their country, and they have a government that publicly funds a lot of their work. We don't have that kind of public funding for the arts or for film or for cinema. So that's problem number one. But number two, I just think that the double the Mexican American, the Chilean American, the Peruvian American, that experience, like for whatever reason, audiences just aren't willing to see themselves in them, or they haven't for a while. So I take great pride in the fact that in this film and in my previous film, Manos de Oro, my white friends, my black friends, my Asian friends all have an in and go, oh, that reminds me of my mom. That reminds me of my dad, my cousin, my uncle. I experienced that with my family, and they're not Latino. Again, they speak a little English, they speak a little Spanish, but there's an in for everybody. I think that like the minute that you make it exclusionary, no one, it just feels like it's for you and by you and for your community, by your community. I just think that's a mistake. I want everybody to be able to enjoy my films. I want everyone to see themselves in it and to find a kernel of truth that they feel like touches their heart. So the problem goes far beyond just short films. It goes all the way up to TV. It goes all the way up to film. I mean, it's feature films. Like it's a problem that I've been very aware for a long time doing this now. And I don't know. All we can do is really just fight the good fight. Keep making the films that are honest to us and honest to me and my lived-in experience as a Mexican American. And short of that, you hope for the best and you hope that people respond, and that's all you can control, right?
Yeah, that's it. But don't stop, because you are one heck of a filmmaker. So you got to keep raising the bar yourself and keep bringing us these great films, because I think this is the first live action short that I've seen, because I had a film documentary, a documentary short earlier. I think it was HollyShorts in Hollywood, where the film documentary Voices from the Abyss won the best documentary category, and they're from Mexico.
Wow. Wow, that's brilliant. Wow. Wow. That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you take any wins you can wherever they are, and that's what you do.
That's it. That's it. But I'm glad that not only are you shining a light for all filmmakers, but you're also doing it for the Hispanic and the Latino community, and you're doing it for the great state of Texas.
That's right. Our home state, man. That's what it is. I think I always tell people this. There's something inherently a little punk rock about making a career in Texas because I'm in LA right now for work and screenings and stuff, but I love it here. It's like a second home. But my first home is and always will be the great state of Texas. I like to think that I want to aspire to be the Richard Linklater of Dallas. Like I just think there's something cool happening in Texas right now in our film community. There's wonderful, wonderful filmmakers. David Lowery's in Dallas. Linklater's in Austin. Clint Bentley, the director of Train Dreams, is in Dallas. He's in South Dallas, where I'm from. So there's a really, really cool energy to what's happening in the great state of Texas and in the film community. And if I can be an active participant and an active contributor to that, I don't see why I would be anywhere else.
Hey, that's it. And hey, I'm just going to give a big shout out to Taylor Sheridan. And Taylor, there's one name you need to remember: Merced Elizondo. Look him
Let's hope he
up.
hears this message.
so so yeah, you're going to make you're already on your way to the top. You're Oscar qualified, and ladies and gentlemen, The Morning of tells the story of Maribel, a young woman mourning the tragic loss of her mother in an unusual way by secretly attending the funerals of strangers. Now, as she searches for solace through the grief of others, her fragile coping mechanism unravels, forcing her to confront the weight of absence, memory, and reconciliation. Now, with restrained yet deeply emotional storytelling, The Morning of illuminates the resilience and the fragility of family bonds and the enduring power of memory to sustain love. Now, The Morning of also stands out as a rare Oscar qualifying short that is both Latino led and independently produced in the United States, and yes, made entirely in Texas by and with the members of the Latino community. Overall, this film moves you. The acting is true, authentic of someone dealing with grief and trying to find a way to move on. The cinematography, like I said, it had me 2 seconds in, and it is wonderful, and the camera work is an absolute joy to watch. Now, we will all learn and take something away from this film, and that the greatest gift of all in film, The Morning of, is an award-winning film, and I can see why. So make sure you see this film and follow its Oscar journey. And Merced, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with me your film, and much success to you and your team on the Oscar journey.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Ward. Thank you so much for the time, and look forward to the time we can do it again in the future.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. You have an open invitation because I can't wait to see what you do next. And
Thank you, sir.
again, you're very, very welcome, Merced. And again, ladies and gentlemen, the Oscar qualified short film, The Morning of, it is a must see film. So when it comes available, look it up. But right now, we're going to be following its Oscar journey. And again, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.